All right, everybody, how you doing? It's Tuesday in September. You can believe that. The calendar flips faster than I can believe. Seems to get faster and faster the older I get. Welcome to Qumulex Radio. I am Josh. This is Aaron. This is episode 3. We have yet to be removed from the air. So we're so very excited and appreciate all the feedback we got on the first 2 episodes. And please keep it coming. We put our email addresses here on the bottom. Or you can comment wherever you see the video posted. We are absolutely reading all of it. So today, I thought a really interesting topic would be, and I hope I can mention them because I mean it in a positive way, IPVM, which I read a lot. I think is a great platform. And I've seen a lot of comments lately in different articles and in some of those comment discussion groups, just where frequently I hear or read that access control is a very hot thing right now. That there's a lot of volume and a lot of traction in the access control world, and I've seen a lot of different theories about why they say that's happening. But Aaron, you're one of our subject matter experts on access control. Anybody that does work with us and has a good sized project, I'm sure has interacted with you. And also, Aaron does a lot of our training videos. That you can see on our YouTube channel. So I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about that? Do you think that access control is a hot thing right now?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's several factors that kind of come to mind when I think about, its kind of expansion in the market. First off, we have, heightened security concerns. These are kind of coming down from, corporate structures and what have you. So these are various factors from terrorism, cyber threats, workplace violence specifically. Their policies are starting to write around, compartmentalizing, the different business groups and kind of segmenting who has access to what. And, of course, I think the pandemic had a big part of that as well.
No.
With the heightened importance of, kind of touchless systems and segmenting people and, kind of keeping tabs on who is where, so there's lots of factors there alone. But I think another big thing worth mentioning is just simply cost. Prior to us discussing this topic, I was really thinking about where access control has been and probably the last, let's say 15 years that I've been involved with it. When we first started off installing some products, I started off working for an end user. It was a corporate, or as actually a government entity. And, what we installed was very complex. I was just thinking back to just getting a net controller online. They actually had these little network modules in which they had no web interface. You would literally install this network module on this board, and then you would have to, set a ARP command to specify an IP address to that MAC address, and then from there you would telnet into it, and then by telnetting into it, then you're now setting the IP settings. You're setting flow control, baud rate, all that kind of stuff. These were back in the 10100 days when all that stuff mattered. That was very labor intensive, and kind of thinking back to just cost, going back to that topic, what a job took with this highly specialized equipment. You needed the techs that were trained and savvy in the products. Not only that, they were big and bulbous. There was one product that we worked with for several years, in the circa 2014 timeframe, where to support 20 doors required literally a 6x4 cabinet that you had to hand truck and forklift in and out of the building. And it was very labor intensive. Now what we're doing with life safety power, sorry for the plug, it's about a quarter of that footprint. So and not only that, the modules are a lot less expensive, and the partners are much more savvy and installing these products. And that just cost is one big factor, I think. And then of course there's other kind of aspects like customer awareness. Look at what we have in the residential markets. People are becoming more and more aware of the solutions that exist, and they kind of demand to kind of be part of those trends of integrated, solutions where you have your video and your access together, and just I would say the heightened awareness of what's happening with facial recognition and biometrics. They kind of, it's no longer a Minority Report movie scene. This is real life. I mean, to an extent, but
Yeah.
that would be my take. I'd be curious to
That's
hear
interesting. So you listed a bunch of really interesting reasons that sound pretty sensible to me, and none of that is what I saw on IPVM. So I mean, I feel like there's so many reasons that this could be the case. So I want to kind of pick up on something that you mentioned, which is the pandemic, right? So I remember back in 2020, especially between like April and like August that year. Um, I was trying to help kind of, we were very new at that point. The product was actually not even released yet. We just had what we called EAPs, where customers could get a gateway and try out our software well in advance of it even being ready for the market, which was a cool program. But, the big things that I heard about was, well, they were having trouble making time to really have much of a conversation about anything because, use like we had a customer in Myrtle Beach, which is kind of a very busy, it's my favorite place on earth. So of course I'll go to that example. But they're a local provider, and they installed access control and manage it for a lot of customers. If you ever been to a tourist or kind of a resort town like that, there's all these shops and businesses and all of these things. And their schedule was changing almost on a weekly basis. So in the past, with your access control solution, maybe it was kind of hard to understand for the end user, or required a lot of effort for the integrator to come out and change the schedules. But how much do they really change? You kind of create some holiday sets to deal with the exceptions, and outside of like a blizzard or something else, it never changed much. And they were dealing with, now this week, because we're at a level whatever, we can be open these many hours, but we can only have this many people in. And some if you were not assigned to a shift, you weren't allowed there. So there were even customers saying certain employees were required to be work from home, couldn't be at the office. And now suddenly their access level changed. They couldn't go to the office. They'd have to go and have somebody would let them in, versus they used to have 24/7 access, and that stuff was changing frequently. So they were looking for something new, and this was not just this one example. I mean, I was hearing this from a lot of people, similar circumstances, and they wanted something that, number one, was easier to deal with, because in the past you didn't really go in and change a lot. You didn't really interact with it a lot. It was something you kind of set up, and outside of it, adding and removing credential holders, which isn't for most a daily thing, unless you're like a data center or you have a lot of visitors or what have you. So there was a lot of that. And the other thing was, they're like, I just, they were dealing with older systems that had been around, and they didn't play well remote, and so they were looking for that remote access, where instead of, they were having to physically drive to dozens of locations every day and send techs out to do this. So it's costing their customer money. They'd have been happy to charge less because they're having a hard time keeping up with all of this. They've been happy to just kind of log in and do something very brief, or do it under like a managed service agreement or something. But I think the pandemic definitely, in my view, I mean, the feedback I've heard really changed people's expectations of, okay, I could have a system that has every bell and whistle known to man. That's great, but my problem isn't that now. My problem is I need basic things that I can manage remotely, and it's very friendly UI, and my customer, can work with it when I need them to work with it. And it's not so hard. I mean, it just kind of, I felt like there was a change there, where it used to be access control was very accepted, and you almost didn't feel good about it. If it wasn't some very complicated, hard to use thing, it felt like a very specialized application to a lot of people, and it required very on-site, approaches. And I think the pandemic really changed that. So I don't know if you saw a lot of that too, or what your experience was.
No, that's a great point. No, I feel like it is. Around that pandemic timeframe, like 2020 and on, there was that big accessibility requirement, like you said, customers were, really leaning more towards something that they could access remotely. And, it's always been widely accepted. And I've very much practiced still today that, access control is an on-prem product. It has a client server architecture that's very much site-based. And then, you have like these outliers like us that, we're like, hey, no, we can bring that access control component to the cloud. And, there's a very high adoption rate right now. So,
Yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with those, systems. I think there's a
No.
time and place for each, but, yeah, definitely, the customer, uh,
Well,
what they're
another
asking
thing that
for.
came up a lot too was like, hey, I'm out in the truck going to these different places. I ought to be able to just grab my phone or my tablet and deal with that. And, a lot of these traditional solutions are really like Windows only, type of solutions where you really need to be at a workstation, in some cases, a licensed workstation. And there was benefit to that in some ways when the world was different, especially where, you wanted to minimize access to it so that things
Sure.
couldn't be easily changed. But, the world changes and suddenly maybe that's not as appealing to some. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
I think that's got to be part of this. And I think what we would agree on is I think we're seeing that trend as well. I
yeah.
don't think anybody that offers access control at the integrator or manufacturer level would argue that we're seeing any type of a downturn or stagnant market with the access control. I mean, it's definitely busy. I think once we had our Mercury integration a year ago, our level of volume took another big leap. As a younger product, and I feel like a large number of our new customers are utilizing access control. I mean, I feel like you have an ear to the ground closer than I do in your role. I mean, are you seeing that? And I mean, it seems like a lot of our projects, involve access control on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, initially it was a small trickle of integrated jobs where, they wanted video and access. Now, I mean, if I had to spitball, I would say it's, really like a 60-40 split with, 60
Yeah.
being, wanting access control with their video. I mean, plus, I mean, not to toot our own horn, we do that very well, being a unified solution,
Mhm.
and I think that there are still cloud-based products out there that definitely struggle with, the two monitor concept, for
Mhm.
management and configuration. So yeah, I mean, that's just purely, the feedback we received, people love that model, they want to move towards that model. So we've capitalized and yeah, I definitely, it shows in the sales for sure.
So I'm going to bring up one more thing. And we did have some requests to make this podcast longer. We're going to accidentally do that today. Just so you know that we read your messages. The one thing I saw heavily mentioned in other sites, IPVM being one of them, is the movement towards mobile credentials. Is a big one that people are bringing up as, increased volumes of access control, as people moving towards maybe a more modern solution that, works with mobile credentials. And we all have some form of that. We do. A lot of those traditional, um, vendors that we're mentioning, also have different ways that they interact. So I don't know that you actually have to replace anything necessarily to get that. I guess it just depends on what you want. But just real briefly, I mean, I know for a fact you've worked on a lot of projects that utilized mobile credentials and in different ways. I mean, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of you know different use cases that are kind of, I think, driving that. So first off, you have security, right? So uh when you have a physical credential, it's more likely to be lost. Maybe not necessarily stolen, but definitely lost. And how many times you can go into the grocery store right now and see like a key making machine, and not only do they doing physical credentials, they're doing specifically 125K credentials. So for that condo resident that misplaced or wants to make multiple copies of their pool key because they're often misplacing it. That's like the kind of perfect example. So, and probably also from a workplace standpoint, typically employers penalize you for losing the card. You're paying whatever, let's say $10 a card, to have them remake it and deactivate your old one. That's also a security risk. So with the mobile credentials, I've seen a lot of arguments that kind of play into, you always know where your phone is, right? Like you're quite literally attached to the hip, and you're less likely to lose that credential, thereby making it secure. And then not only that, nobody can just pick it up and use it. There's typically an authentication component to it, so whether biometric, facial recognition, depending on what your phone supports, you have that kind of added security, which, security minded individuals that we work with every day, they absolutely love that factor. So, but the other piece is, there's a lot of various, I don't know, advantages to it. So for example, typically, you will have some kind of authentication that would take place to initially get in the building. But once you're in your suite, then you can have, free range of motion where you can literally configure it so that you don't have to remove it from your, pocket, from your purse. And it's literally opening the door as you walk up to it. So these are some advancements in that field that, have led to a better user experience. So there's a bunch of different factors that are driving this. So it's pretty interesting to see where it's going, where it's heading.
So you see that too? So it sounds like there's a lot of reasons that we're seeing this upward trend. And, I still think, and maybe this is biased just because of, my role as a product manager, but I definitely also feel that there's a desire for that unified approach. And we're allowed to toot our horn once in a while. It is our podcast. We can do that. But that was definitely the reason, one of the reasons that we started off. It's a harder path as a new product to do a unified solution. But it definitely, there's some convenience there and some simplification, that I go to one place, especially if I'm going to use my mobile device more, and I go to one place, and it's not just integrated, it's all built together. And we're not the only one that does that, but that was definitely important to us. And so I think maybe that unified experience, especially paired with, the newer products, of course, you're building something now, you're going to build it differently than you did 15 or 20 years ago. So it's going to play well with all the different types of devices, not just Windows, or, you're not going to be stuck with just one kind of a mobile app. I think a lot of the traditional access control really doesn't have much in the way of like a mobile app, outside of maybe those mobile credentials that have come later. So a long list of reasons why, which is kind of what I expected, but that was very interesting. So I think we'll stop it there. I think we gave everybody the little bit extra they're asking for. I think the next slew of emails would be, could you guys not talk so long? I think that's that's the way show business goes, right? Well, Aaron, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate all the knowledge you bring, especially on this access control. And we're planning on doing another one of these Thursdays. So hopefully we'll see everybody then. Until then, thanks so much for watching.